Okay, so get this, right. Today, we're going to like really dig into this whole open source software thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and specifically how Linux, the operating system, went from kind of being this niche thing to like a total tech powerhouse.
Right. Right.
It's wild. It proves
Well,
that sometimes the best stuff is free.
yeah, and what's really fascinating to me about Linux is how its success really throws a wrench into that old way of making software. It's like this whole David and Goliath story playing out.
Totally. Like, picture those old school software companies, right?
Right.
Just like locked away in their like metaphorical ivory towers, crafting these perfect software cathedrals.
Oh my gosh.
Years, sometimes decades would go by, and they wouldn't even let anyone see it.
Exactly. That's that whole cathedral model. Super tight control, very few people have any input, and forget about frequent releases. It was a completely different world back then.
And then, bam, here comes Linux, totally changing the game, leading the charge for this bizarre model of open source.
Yep.
Open collaboration, everyone's throwing in ideas, constantly updating. The total opposite of that ivory tower mentality.
And right at the heart of this whole revolution is Eric Raymond and his essay, The Cathedral and the Bazaar. It's like the open source Bible. He basically argues that this radical openness, this bizarre approach, is exactly why Linux exploded the way it did.
Roman actually uses his own story of building this program, FetchMail, to show exactly how this works in the real world. It's like a perfect example of the Bazaar's power.
And what's really cool about FetchMail is how it highlights these aha moments, these breakthroughs that happen when you just open up the development process.
Okay, but hold on a sec before we get too far.
Yeah.
What exactly is FetchMail?
Okay, so picture this. It's the dark ages of dial-up internet, right? You don't want to be online all the time just waiting to get email.
Oh, the worst.
So FetchMail lets you connect, grab your messages, and then you're out of there. Super useful back then.
Makes total sense. It's like scratching your own itch, right?
Yeah.
Building a tool to fix a problem you actually have.
And that's so key. Good software often comes from a personal need. But here's the real turning point. Raymond didn't keep his code a secret. Nope, he put it out there early on. Asked for feedback, encouraged people to mess with it. He totally embraced that beautiful chaos of the Bazaar.
So he was all like, come on in, the water's fine, let's build this thing together.
Exactly. And that's when things get really interesting, like magic almost. People started actually using FetchMail, they found bugs, suggested improvements, even started contributing their own code. It was like having a worldwide team of volunteers working on this thing 24/7.
Wow, talk about crowdsourcing, right? But let's talk about those bugs for a minute. They're
Yeah.
like every developer's worst nightmare.
Mhm.
How did this whole bizarre approach help Raymond actually get rid of them better?
All right, so this is where we get to one of the most famous ideas in open source, Linus's law.
Okay.
Linus Torvalds, the guy behind Linux, said, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow.
So more people looking at the code means that they'll find and fix problems faster.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
It's the foundation of the Bazaar. You get a massive community all testing, tweaking, playing with the code. Bugs get spotted and squashed way faster. But it's not just about speed, though. It's about the quality of the solutions that come out of that process.
It's actually amazing when you read about it. Raymond actually gives credit to a user for suggesting a feature that totally changed FetchMail.
Oh, absolutely. That SMTP forwarding feature was genius, pure, and simple, and it came straight from someone using the software who saw a need that Raymond hadn't even considered.
That's huge. So it's not just about fixing what's broken. It's about how this open way of doing things can lead to a way better product. It really makes you think twice about that old way of doing things, all those ivory towers, all that control. Maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be.
It's a really fascinating point that Raymond makes, for sure. Like, this idea that letting go a little, embracing that chaos could actually lead to something better, more innovative. It challenges everything we think we know about, like efficiency and being in control.
Okay, so let's say I'm sold, right? I'm all in on this whole bizarre thing. How do you actually manage a project when literally anyone can contribute? I mean, how do you set goals, track progress, all that, without someone calling the shots?
See, that's where things get really, really interesting, because in the open source world, things kind of work a little differently. Goals, they kind of just emerge organically from the community's needs, their passions. It's less about top-down orders and more about harnessing everyone's brain power. The people using and building the software, they're the ones driving it forward.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. But with everyone and their brother chiming in, things could get, well, Messy, right. I
Yeah.
mean, how do you keep everything on track? Make sure important stuff doesn't just slip through the cracks.
But that's the beauty of it, right? It's like built-in quality control because everything's out in the open code, discussions, bug reports. It's like this constant peer review is happening, accountability on a massive scale.
Oh, wow. So it's like having 1,000 people double-checking everything, making sure it's all good. That's really kind of amazing when you think about it.
And because of that, right, problems get spotted and fixed so much faster than they would the traditional way. It's like having a real-time feedback loop that's constantly making the project better.
Okay, that all sounds amazing so far, but I'm going to guess it's not always sunshine and roses in the open source world, right?
Go.
What about, like, ego clashes? Developers, we know they're passionate about their work. Isn't there, like, a risk of things getting, a little heated when everyone's got an opinion?
Totally. And that's where this idea of egoless programming comes in. It's like a core value in open source. It's about recognizing that no single person owns the code. Every contribution matters. And the goal is always to make the best possible thing, not about protecting someone's ego.
So it's more about being open to feedback, even if it means your own code gets tossed out for something better. That takes some serious humility.
It really does. It's about putting the project first. And honestly, it often just leads to much better results. Like in a traditional setting, people might be afraid to criticize each other, but in open source, feedback is everything. That's how you grow, how you learn.
Creates this whole culture of, like, constant improvement, which is pretty cool when you think about it.
Yeah.
Reading about Raymond's experience, it struck me how he connects open source to this joy of creation. It's almost like a form of play.
Oh, that's a really good point. Raymond argues that, yeah, this model really taps into our natural desire to create, to solve problems, to be a part of something bigger. And that's what leads to better, more innovative work.
It makes you wonder, why isn't this everywhere? I mean,
Right.
if it works this well for software, why not try it with other things too?
Yeah. It's a great question. And, Raymond actually got to test this idea out in a really big way when Netscape, the company behind that web browser, yeah, the one that used to be everywhere, they decided to go open source.
Oh, yeah. That was huge. Everyone was talking about it.
Yeah.
It was a big risk, wasn't it?
Huge. They were getting hammered by Microsoft's Internet Explorer, and they needed like a Hail Mary. They saw open source as a way to tap into like the collective brain power of, the entire developer community. They wanted to build a better product, and they wanted to do it fast.
So what happened? Did it work?
It's kind of mixed bag, honestly. On the one hand, yeah, it led to Mozilla, which gave us Firefox. That's a huge win for open source.
Totally. Firefox became incredibly popular. It was right up there with Internet Explorer. So that's got to count for something, right?
It does, but it wasn't easy. Mozilla had tons of challenges, organization, technical stuff, you name it.
So it's not like a guaranteed recipe for success then.
Exactly. Open sourcing something isn't some magic bullet. You need other things too, right? A strong vision, a dedicated community, and the ability to adapt as you go.
Yeah, so it's not like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it makes you think, what are, like, the big takeaways here? What can we actually learn from all this, the good and the bad, about this whole open source movement?
Yeah, it's like I think the big lesson is that there's no magic formula for building software. Every project's can be its own thing, its own challenges. But what open source shows us is just how powerful collaboration can be, how important transparency is, and tapping into that thing we all have, that drive to create and contribute.
It's like unlocking something that those old ways just miss.
Totally. Think about it. Open source projects, they thrive on the passion, the dedication of those communities. These are people driven by making something awesome, something useful, something that actually makes a difference. And that right there is powerful stuff.
Pretty unscaring when you really get down to it.
Yeah.
So if we were to leave our listener with one last thought, one thing to chew on as they go about their day, what would it be?
I think the big question to ask is, if this open source thing, if it works because of that inner drive, that joy of creating and working together, what can we do if we took that same idea and applied it to other parts of our lives? Could we find solutions to problems we haven't even thought of yet?
Now that's something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of open source. It's a world full of, like, these crazy contradictions, these awesome success stories, and lessons that go way beyond just software. Until next time.